The Trump administration is escalating its offensive on two critical fronts: higher education and global trade. Universities, long viewed by Trump's allies as strongholds of liberal ideology, are now facing deep funding cuts and ideological scrutiny. Meanwhile, Trump's renewed trade war with China threatens economic stability, sparking fears of job losses and rising consumer prices. How will these policies reshape America's future? Let's get in focus. The Trump administration has declared an all-out war on higher education. Research funding is being gutted, ideological restrictions are tightened, and academic institutions are under siege. Is this an effort to reform the education system or a calculated attack on intellectual freedom? Now, the New York Times reveals how Trump's administration, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, is systematically dismantling higher education in the U.S. The article exposes deep cuts to federal research funding, which threaten scientific progress and weaken America's global standing. Universities face rising tuition costs, department closures, and cancelled research projects. Meanwhile, China is doubling down on investments in education, giving it a competitive edge in technology and innovation. With the administration prioritizing political loyalty over academic excellence, is the U.S. on a path to self-inflicted intellectual decline? Joining us now is Mr. Ahmed Maharim, a writer and political researcher. Mr. Maharim, good evening to you, sir, and welcome to In Focus. Now, let me start here with Trump's administration, and it has made it clear that it is hostile towards higher education, with Vice President J.D. Vance openly calling universities the enemy. What is the driving force behind this assault?
I think that will remind us on the 80s, by the time of President Reagan, the education advisors and consulting made a very strong and sensitive report. It was on the desk of President Reagan, says, nation under danger. They compare the standard of students in math and technology in Russia and China way beyond the students in America. And that's why President Reagan, he called for a very important matter, and he consists from the 80s up to 2000 in 20 years was a very, very important issue that education was on the big eyes of all the responsible people in America. Right now, seems like America went too far left. By the time of Biden, determination of DEI, which is diversity, equality, and inclusion. That kind of a program was admitted during Democrat and specifically during Biden time. Most of the establishments of the universities, all the big, firms in America, they were using this kind of program. But what happened, I think, usually in the American system and American culture, they encourage the students, universities and high school, to go more to the sports. And if the people successfully made something unique or some good achievement in the sports, they win something, they call it either a scholarship to go for the university for free, 100% paid by the government, or maybe some kind of discount. When it comes to sport, I think one incident happened some time ago for the women or ladies swimming competitive. A gentleman used to go on the men, but he was not successful to do it with the men. So he was allowed to go within the women one, and he won when he was a women one. That kind to remind us with the gender matter between Democrat and the other party in the United States. Still, the battle is going on. But what's happened within the new era of forthcoming years with Trump, I think something could be a very sensitive matter. We have to watch and see what will happen next.
But Mr. Maharim, U.S. has always given a priority for scientific research. Now, Trump's education policies have slashed federal research funding, particularly for medical and scientific advancements. Now, how will this impact U.S. innovation and global competitiveness?
That's a good question. I think President Trump, every president has his own personal touch. President Trump, his background as a negotiator and real estate development, and the book he wrote it by himself, how he can succeed to make negotiations. In different things you can make negotiations, but successful in the future of a country has to do with the ideas of President Trump. Usually America has a standby or a kind of reaction in the entire world that it is the biggest country, support media, support movies, support culture exchange, plus diplomacy and the economy. When it comes as a priorities, President Trump put economy when he said America first, but he does not explain to us or to the world what does it mean by first. First in what? In global military, in global economy. But I think the determination of so many points has to be declared that in order to put America great again, science, we remember the very big competitive between Russia and America during the who was the first to reach or to land as a human in the moon. And it was a big failure from America to hear that Russia was the first. And then all the other presidents from that time onwards, they create NASA. And since that time, I think there is big amount of investment going to the psychology and kind of researches. I hope that sometime with the good advisors around President Trump, I think he may change his ideas.
Now, the United States has always had this policy of building capabilities and investing in human resources. Now, with these budget cuts, universities are forced to raise tuition or shut down programs. What does this mean for middle and lower income students who rely on higher education for upward mobility?
I think that's a very critical kind of decision or idea because globally, America considered on the top of the higher education and universities. There is hundreds of thousands of students, mainly from China, from other countries in Europe. Their families are sending them and they invest a lot. Even Arab, there's so many Arab students. Saudi Arabia has 100,000 students coming every year, budgeted and costed by the government of Saudi Arabia. That means the credibility of the higher education in America give them the chance to attract those people. If that kind of budget will be deducted, of course, it will affect the local American people, especially the under budget or the middle class people, which they are the majority of every country. But also it will have a very negative impact on the future of the higher education in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Now, given these drastic changes, what is the long-term outlook for the U.S. higher education, do you think? Can universities recover once Trump leaves office, or will the damage be irreversible?
I wonder to answer this question properly because I was told, or I know that most of those number one class or first class universities, like Harvard, for instance, there is contribution and there is so many big firms, business people are contributing to those. The finance is not only from the government. So I hope if the other finance coming from different places, so what with how much is the role of the government, is that cut can be recovered, or if the cut will be higher. So I think something has to be declared between, maybe if the government is cutting from one side, maybe that will help other big firms to come and cover this kind of cut in order to keep the standard as it used to be.
Do you think, from your point of view, this has to do with any kind of political uh, uh, um, uh, uh, side, or is this is a kind of a politicized decision?
I assume yes, unfortunately, because it was for the first time to see and to watch what happened to the biggest universities in New York and the other states during the strike of the students towards Gaza during the last few months. For the first time, 3 or 4 are the deans or the president of the universities are asked to be answer certain questions in the Congress. And some of those students, they were arrested for some time. It has a kind of political impact, unfortunately, yes.
Right, Mr. Maharem, we thank you so much for your insights, and definitely we appreciate your time here. Trump's policies are undermining America's intellectual and scientific leadership while global competitors seize the opportunity to advance. But the attack on academia is just one part of a broader agenda. Trump is also escalating his economic war with China.
Donald Trump is his name, and he's there to stay.
As unlikely, impossible, is now reality.
America powerful. We will win, win, win. And we will make America great again. Let's do our encourage. We will very quickly make America great again.
Well, welcome back. Now, Trump's economic aggression is back, and this time it's hitting America's businesses and consumers harder than ever. With new tariffs on Chinese imports and steel and aluminium, Trump is waging a trade war that could backfire spectacularly. Will this strategy restore U.S. manufacturing dominance, or is it setting the economy up for failure? Now, The Guardian outlines how Trump's latest tariffs, particularly a 25% levy on steel and aluminium, are meant to revive U.S. manufacturing, but are instead harming American businesses and workers. The article highlights how China is retaliating with its own tariffs on U.S. goods, further escalating tensions. Meanwhile, key industries such as automotive and construction face rising costs, which will ultimately be passed down to American consumers. Trump's so-called reciprocal tariffs may sound like tough leadership, but they risk pushing the U.S. into economic isolation. Would this strategy backfire? Now, to put some analysis into that, we're joined now by Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Center of Washington. Good evening to you, Mr. Russell, and welcome to In Focus. Let me here ask you, now, President Trump's tariff are being presented as a way to revive U.S. manufacturing. In reality, how do these policies impact the American economy from your point of view?
Well, thank you for having me, as always. The reality is that Donald Trump is talking a big game, saying that tariffs, in fact, will cost the Chinese or the European partners or Canada or Mexico. Those countries will pay for it, and that's how tariffs work. When the reality is, tariffs don't work that way. As we all know, that when Trump puts on a tariff, the tariff is passed on to the consumer, which results in higher prices. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that Donald Trump and his economic advisors have thought about the possibilities of economic pressures that come when you start getting into a large-scale trade war. It's hard enough to get on a trade war with just China, but when you mix in our European allies and then our two biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico, that's a huge economic pressure that I don't think the Trump administration has thought out.
Now, the US administration has said, or it claims, that these tariffs will bring back American jobs. But history, as you said respectively, has shown that tariffs often lead to higher consumer costs and job losses. Now, will this time be of any difference, do you think?
Look, the Trump administration is going to have to deal with the reality of the fact that we are not the manufacturing nation that we were in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s. We are a country that depends on just-in-time logistics and gets a lot of our consumable products from overseas imports. That's why we have a trade deficit right now with most of our major trading partners, particularly countries like China and India. Mm-hmm. The reality now is that when we look at the effects of having a trade war with China, this has a global impact. For example, one of the theories that I think I've talked about on this show before is the idea of mutually assured economic destruction, where because the U.S. is so intertwined and so interdependent on the supplies that come from Far East manufacturers such as China, we expect to order it on Amazon and have it in 48 hours at our front door. And a lot of these are products that are made in Far East Asia, China, Korea, etc. The U.S. has also become used to the low price of those consumable goods. They've become used to buying cheap T-shirts on Temu or buying $200 flat screen TVs made in China on Amazon. When you start getting into a trade war like this, the mutually assured economic destruction is the Chinese need our money to buy their products in order to keep growing their economy in going neck and neck with us to try and be the biggest economy in the world. So they need that money. They can't afford to get into a large-scale trade war with the U.S. The U.S. can't afford it because if it does, and we can't manufacture those products, so that means that Americans aren't buying those products, which means that those are going to put the ancillary, the support jobs out of work that supply that, transportation, logistics, etc. All those jobs are intertwined, and because we become such a global intertwined economy, it makes playing trade war with somebody as large a trading partner as we have with China very, very risky, not just to the economy, but to the political future of the Republican Party.
But Mr. Rosser, we're not talking anymore about cheap products. Now, China has already retaliated with tariffs on U.S. coal, crude oil, and rare earth metals. How might this trade war impact key American industries from your point of view here?
Well, again, if there's a tariff on those raw materials, and China, which uses a lot of them, if China does not buy them, there's not a huge market for some of these second-tier markets to buy it. Well, if they're not producing and if they're not selling, there's no need to produce or garner.
Yes, but Mr. Russell, they might take it from alternatives, other countries, for instance.
Sure.
Replace that.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. But that is the risk that is got to be considered by the Trump administration. The idea that if the Chinese go to elsewhere, if the Chinese go to other alternatives for their raw materials, which there are, well, what does that do to the U.S. producers? That means that there could be job losses and economic hardships in those industries. And the same thing goes with the U.S. We talk about the fact that one of the largest importers of American vehicles, in fact, is China. And China has a huge market, but if they're putting tariff and they're making Fords and Chryslers and Chevrolets way too expensive to acquire in China, that's a huge market that's going to impact the jobs, the workforce, and the economy of very, very key areas to Donald Trump, such as Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois, even into the Carolinas, where there's a lot of car manufacturing. This mutual tariff suggestion that Donald Trump is putting out there, I think, is placating more to his base. It's placating more to his campaign promises, but there's nothing really set to back up that this is a good idea for the U.S. workforce and the U.S. economy.
Right. But before the Biden administration has largely maintained Trump's tariffs during his term, showing bipartisan agreement on getting tough with China. But are tariffs truly an effective tool for rebalancing trade relations?
It can be, but you've got to have something to back it up. The idea that you can just arbitrarily threaten tariffs, if somebody calls your bluff on that, and then you're in a real pickle. Excuse me. The idea that the Chinese the mutual tariffs that we're talking about with other trading partners basically results in a situation where the economics don't necessarily, or the benefits, the cost benefits or the political benefits don't necessarily meet the measurement to be effective, especially if you're talking about the end result could be loss of jobs, it could be loss of economic development and economic sustainable growth. But here's the most important thing is, if you look, for example, what Donald Trump was talking about, yes, Joe Biden did in fact keep a lot of Trump's tariffs in place. And we can see what happened. The economy, although we had low unemployment numbers and there was white hot economic growth in certain sectors, in large part, inflation went up. And a good part of that can be blamed on the fact that there was the tariffs that were placed on consumable goods that the U.S. routinely imports. If the inflation continues to go up, and remember, Trump ran in 2024 on a platform that he could drastically reduce inflation. Well, so far in his first month in office, inflation's gone up 3.2% since Biden left. So there's a lot of variables in this. And this is happening very quickly, very early in Trump's administration. And people like Peter Navarro are going to have to start really taking a hard look. Is this an effective war that we want to fight?
Now, this trade war comes at a very critical time. It comes at the backdrop of the economy, the world economy, the global economy at large, so reeling from previous economic disruptions. Now, from your point of view, some experts argue rather that the real issue isn't China, but wealth inequality within the US. Now, could Trump's focus on trade wars be a distraction from addressing domestic economic disparities?
Now, I find that argument a little hard to digest, quite frankly. You know, the U.S. the U.S. economic cycles are just that, cyclical. We've seen, the high of highs through, going from Jimmy Carter and we saw the challenges, the economic challenges that Jimmy Carter had into Reaganomics. At the end of the Reagan second term, it became very difficult. George H.W. Bush inherited, an economy where he ran on no new taxes. He inherited an economy that had to raise taxes. So this is a very cyclical, going through Obama and even into Trump, Biden, and now Trump again.
So
That being said,
yes.
I'm going. Yeah, go ahead. Now.
Just briefly, because I have only 1 minute left for me here. Do you think that this aggressive approach or this trade war could lead to another recession?
Possibly. I'm not an economist, but I will tell you that judging from what I'm seeing, judging from what we're seeing just in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration, I think we could be very teetering on a very delicate situation that could lead to another recession similar to the economics that we dealt with at the pandemic.
All right, Mr. Brasser, we thank you so much for joining us here and for sharing definitely your valuable insights. Now, Trump economic policies may be back-aged as a defense of American workers, but in reality, they could cause long-term damage to the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, his attack on academia threatens to strip the country of his intellectual leadership. From higher education to global trade, Trump's policies are driven by ideology, not strategy, as universities face an existential crisis and tariffs threaten economic stability. The real question is how much damage will be done before the country wakes up to the consequences. That brings us to the end of today's episode of In Focus. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.